Picture this. You're working full-time, maybe even more than full-time. You're not blowing money on vacations or designer clothes. You pack your lunch. You skip the fancy coffee. You do everything the financial gurus tell you to do. You set a budget. You track your spending. You try to be responsible. And yet at the end of every single month, you have almost nothing left. The number in your bank account barely moves. Sometimes it goes backwards. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a really uncomfortable question starts forming. What am I actually doing wrong? Because you're not being reckless. You're not stupid. You're not making obvious mistakes. And yet the financial progress you're supposed to be making just isn't happening. And the longer it goes on, the more it starts to feel like maybe the problem is you. Like maybe you're missing something that everyone else seems to understand. Here's the thing. Maybe you're not doing anything wrong. Maybe the reason you're stuck isn't about discipline or laziness or avocado toast. Maybe the real reason is something that nobody in the personal finance world wants to talk about because it's a lot more complicated than just stop spending money on things you don't need. My name is Yael, and I spend a lot of time thinking about money, psychology, and why some people seem to build wealth almost effortlessly while others work just as hard and never seem to get ahead. If you've ever felt like the financial system is working against you, or like you're running as fast as you can just to stay in the same place, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it ends up changing how you see your situation. Now, before we get into the real reason poor people stay poor, let me tell you what it is not. It is not laziness. It is not a lack of discipline. And it is definitely not the $4 coffee. I am so tired of the financial advice industrial complex acting like the reason millions of people can't build wealth is because they're buying too many lattes. If you took every single dollar that the average low-income person spends on small indulgences and redirected every single cent of it towards savings, it would barely move the needle because the problem is not at the margins. The problem is structural, and it starts with something called the scarcity trap. Here's what that means. When you don't have money, your brain changes. And I don't mean that in a motivational poster kind of way. I mean it literally, neurologically changes how you process decisions. Researchers Senthil Mullainathan and Eldar Shafir spent years studying the psychology of scarcity, and what they found was remarkable. When people are operating under conditions of financial scarcity, their cognitive bandwidth gets almost entirely consumed by the immediate problem in front of them. Every mental resource gets redirected toward solving the crisis right now. Think about what that actually means in practice. When you're worried about making rent, your brain is essentially running an emergency program in the background at all times. It's like having 50 browser tabs open on a laptop that's already running slow. You technically have the capacity to think about long-term planning. You technically have access to the same logic and intelligence you always had. But the processing power just isn't available the way it normally would be because everything is being used to manage the immediate situation. And here's where it gets really cruel. This mental bandwidth consumption leads directly to worse financial decision-making. Not because poor people are less intelligent. The research is very clear on this point. It's because the cognitive load of poverty literally impairs the same executive functions that are required to make good financial decisions: willpower, long-term thinking, impulse control, delayed gratification. All of it gets degraded when your brain is stuck in survival mode. So the same financial gurus who are telling you to just be more disciplined are essentially telling a person running a marathon to just try harder in the last mile, while completely ignoring the fact that that person has been carrying a 50-pound backpack the entire race. The advice isn't wrong exactly. Discipline does matter, but giving that advice without acknowledging the weight of the backpack is not just unhelpful, it's dishonest. But the scarcity trap is just the psychological layer. Underneath that is something even more concrete, something I call the poverty premium. And once you understand this, you will never look at financial inequality the same way again. Here's the brutal truth that most people genuinely don't realize. Being poor is expensive. I mean that literally. The less money you have, the more you pay for almost everything in your life. Not slightly more, significantly more. And this isn't an accident. It's a feature of how the system is actually built. Let's start with something relatively simple. Car insurance. If you have a poor credit score, and statistically, low income correlates very strongly with lower credit scores, you will pay significantly more for the exact same car insurance policy as someone with excellent credit. Not because you're a worse driver, not because you're higher risk on the road, but because insurance companies in most states use credit scores as a pricing factor. So the person who can least afford high premiums is the person paying the highest premiums. That's the poverty premium in action. Then there's the banking system. If you can't maintain a minimum balance in a traditional bank account, you get hit with monthly maintenance fees, which means the people with the least money are literally paying fees every month just to access their own money. And many low-income households don't qualify for traditional banking relationships at all, which pushes them toward check cashing services and prepaid debit cards that charge transaction fees for every single use. You pay to cash your paycheck. You pay to load money onto your card. You pay to check your balance. Every financial action has a cost, and those costs add up to hundreds of dollars per year. And then there's payday loans. This is where the math gets genuinely horrifying. The average payday loan carries an annual percentage rate of around 400%. Not 4%, not 40%, 400. When someone takes out a payday loan, they are not doing it because they are bad with money or financially irresponsible. They are doing it because they need $300 right now, and they have absolutely no other option. The emergency fund that would have made the payday loan unnecessary doesn't exist because there was never enough breathing room to build it. And so they borrow money at an insane interest rate just to get through the week. And next week, they owe back more than they borrowed. And the week after that, the cycle continues. This is the trap inside the trap. You need money to avoid the financial products that are specifically designed to extract money from people who don't have money. Let's talk about grocery shopping for a second because this one really illustrates just how expensive poverty actually is in ways most people never think about. When you have money, you can buy in bulk. You can stock up when things go on sale. You can invest in a membership that saves you thousands of dollars per year. You can buy higher quality food that keeps you healthier and more productive. When you're broke, you buy what you can afford right now. You pay full price because you cannot afford the larger package that works out to a lower cost per unit. You eat whatever is available and affordable, which often means more processed food, more sodium, more sugar, fewer vegetables, less protein, and over time, that has real health consequences, which leads to higher healthcare costs, which drains more money, which makes it harder to ever get ahead. Even healthcare itself follows this exact pattern. People with financial stability go to the doctor for preventive care. They get annual checkups. They catch problems when they're small and cheap to fix. People without financial stability skip the doctor because they can't afford the copay. They wait until something becomes a genuine emergency, at which point the cost is exponentially higher. Being poor doesn't just cost more money. It costs more health, more energy, more years off your life. But here's where the story gets even more interesting. And this is the part that I think almost all financial content completely ignores. Let's talk about time poverty, because this might be the most underrated factor in the entire conversation. One of the most common pieces of financial advice is to educate yourself, learn about investing, read books about personal finance, take online courses, start a side hustle, build additional income streams. All of this advice sounds completely reasonable on the surface, but it assumes something that people with money take completely for granted. It assumes you have time. When you're working one full-time job and a part-time job on weekends just to cover your basic monthly expenses, you don't have time to research index funds at night. You don't have the mental energy at the end of a double shift to sit down and thoughtfully map out a 5-year financial plan. You're not lazy. You're not unmotivated. You're exhausted in a way that people who have never worked that hard for that little simply cannot understand. And the system that created the conditions requiring you to work that hard is the exact same system handing you advice that requires free time you simply do not have. There's also something deeply unfair about how financial opportunity distributes itself across income levels. The best financial tools, the ones that actually build meaningful wealth over time, are almost entirely accessible only to people who already have money. A high-yield savings account that earns 4 or 5% interest. You typically need a minimum opening deposit and a clean banking history to qualify. Tax-advantaged index fund investing through a 401k. Only available if your employer offers a retirement plan and you have enough monthly surplus to contribute anything at all. Real estate investment requires capital for a down payment that can take a decade to save if you're starting from zero while also paying high rent. Meanwhile, the financial products that are marketed most aggressively to low-income communities are payday loans, rent-to-own furniture stores, buy here, pay here car lots, high-fee prepaid cards, and lottery tickets. These products don't build wealth. They extract it slowly, consistently, and legally. So let's be completely honest about what we've actually been describing this entire video. The reason poor people stay poor is not primarily a character flaw. It is a system, a set of compounding, interlocking mechanisms that are extraordinarily difficult to exit once you're inside them. The psychological tax of scarcity impairs the very decision-making required to escape it. The poverty premium means you are literally paying more for everything than people who earn more than you. Time poverty prevents you from taking the steps that financial advisors tell you to take. And the best wealth-building tools require a baseline of money and stability to access in the first place. Understanding this matters, not because it removes personal responsibility from the equation, but because you cannot solve a problem you fundamentally misdiagnose. If you believe you're poor because you lack discipline, your solution will be to try harder to be disciplined. But if you understand that you're poor, partly because a system of financial products and structural barriers is designed to keep you there, your solutions look completely different. Now, here's what I want to leave you with, because I refuse to let this video be a dead end. The cycle is real, the system is real, the barriers are real, and none of that means the situation is permanent. The research on breaking out of the poverty trap points to something consistent. The exit ramp is smaller than most people think, and it starts with one thing: a financial buffer. Even a small one. Remember what I mentioned about that Vanguard research, having just $2,000 in savings, which is less than most people spend on a car payment in 3 months, increases measured financial well-being by over 20%. Not because $2,000 solves anything on its own, but because it begins to shift your brain out of constant survival mode. It creates just enough breathing room for your executive functions to start coming back online, which leads to slightly better decisions, which builds slightly more savings, which creates a little more breathing room, which allows for slightly better decisions again. The exit from a poverty trap is not a single dramatic moment. It is a slow accumulation of small advantages that compound on each other over time. The first step is not investing in the stock market. It is not launching a side hustle. It is not reading 10 personal finance books. It is building any financial buffer at all, even $50 that you don't touch, even 20. The goal is simply to interrupt the scarcity cycle long enough for your brain to operate even slightly outside of pure survival mode. And here's maybe the most important thing I can tell you, because it's the thing that actually changes everything in the long run. The identity shift matters just as much as the money itself. The people who successfully break out of financial traps don't just change their bank balance. They change how they understand themselves in relation to money. They stop seeing themselves as someone that money happens to, and they start seeing themselves as someone who makes decisions about money. That shift in identity doesn't require wealth. It doesn't require a perfect credit score or a high salary or a financial advisor. It requires a decision, and decisions are free. If this video helped you understand your financial situation differently, if it gave you even one new framework for thinking about why things have felt so hard, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who need to hear this. Subscribe if you want more honest, research-backed conversations about money, psychology, and how wealth actually works in the real world.